Manhattan glittered like a sea of diamonds as the sunset painted the sky in hues of amber and gold. Perched on the 65th floor of the Reynolds Tower, the Summit restaurant was the crown jewel of New York's elite dining scene. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered breathtaking panoramic views of the city, while inside, crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over white tablecloths and polished silverware. The air was perfumed with the scent of truffle oil and expensive wine, punctuated by the gentle clink of glasses and hushed conversations about million-dollar deals. Blake Harrison, the restaurant's maitre d', surveyed the dining room with practiced precision. Every table was filled with the city's most influential figures, hedge fund managers, tech entrepreneurs, celebrities trying to maintain low profiles despite their recognizable faces. The Summit wasn't just a restaurant, it was a power broker's paradise, a place where reputations were made and deals were sealed over $400 bottles of Bordeaux. At a corner table, Mason Brooks sat with two associates, his custom Armani suit tailored to perfection. At 45, Mason had built Brooks Development into one of Manhattan's most aggressive real estate firms. His distinctive silver-streaked dark hair and perpetual half-smile had graced the cover of Forbes twice. He wasn't just a regular at the Summit, he was practically institution, commanding the best table every Tuesday and Thursday without fail. "The Brooklyn waterfront project is practically ours," Mason declared, swirling his whiskey. "The board votes next week, but I've already secured 6 of the 9 votes." His companions nodded appreciatively, understanding that in Mason's world, deals were done long before papers were signed. The harmonious rhythm of the evening was interrupted when the elevator doors slid open, revealing a figure that immediately felt out of place. A girl no older than 13 stepped tentatively into the restaurant. Her faded blue jeans had a small tear at one knee, and her simple white t-shirt was a stark contrast to the evening gowns and tailored suits surrounding her. Her light brown hair was pulled back in a hasty ponytail, several strands escaping to frame a face that looked both determined and anxious. Blake immediately moved toward the elevator, his professional smile firmly in place, but concern evident in his eyes. The Summit had a strict dress code, and children were generally discouraged unless they were the well-behaved offspring of the city's elite, properly dressed for the occasion. The girl scanned the room slowly, her eyes moving from table to table as if searching for someone. Several diners had already noticed her presence, conversations pausing momentarily as curious glances were cast in her direction. "Can I help you, miss?" Blake asked quietly, positioning himself to block her further entry into the dining room. "I'm looking for my grandmother," the girl replied, her voice soft but clear. "She told me to meet her here at 6 o'clock. Blake's smile remained fixed. "I see. And what is your grandmother's name? Perhaps she has a reservation I can check." The girl opened her mouth to respond, but before she could answer, Mason Brooks's voice cut through the air. "Blake, what is this?" he called out, his tone sharp enough to draw attention from nearby tables. "There's a dress code at the Summit. This isn't a McDonald's." Blake's professional demeanor faltered for just a moment before he recovered. "Mr. Brooks, I'm just assisting this young lady in finding her—" "This is ridiculous," Mason interrupted, standing up from his table. He approached them, his imposing 6'2" frame towering over the girl. "This is one of the finest establishments in Manhattan. We don't need street urchins wandering in off the elevator." The girl looked up at Mason, her eyes widening but her expression remaining remarkably composed. "I'm not—" she began. "Get her out of here," Mason said to Blake, not even bothering to look at the girl anymore. "This place isn't for her kind." Blake hesitated, visibly uncomfortable with the situation. Several other diners were now openly watching the scene unfold, their expressions ranging from embarrassment to quiet agreement with Mason. "Sir, perhaps if I could just check if her grandmother is indeed dining with us tonight," Blake suggested diplomatically. Mason's expression hardened. "Blake, I've been coming here twice a week for 8 years. I'm close personal friends with David Mitchell. Do you really want me to call him and ask why the Summit is suddenly allowing children in off the street?" The mention of the restaurant manager's name had the intended effect. Blake sighed almost imperceptibly, then turned to the girl. "I'm very sorry, miss, but I'm going to have to ask you to leave. If your grandmother is indeed dining with us, perhaps you could call her to meet you downstairs in the lobby." The girl stood perfectly still for a moment, her gaze moving from Blake to Mason, and then sweeping across the room one more time. Something in her eyes seemed to change, not filling with tears as one might expect, but rather hardening with a quiet dignity that seemed beyond her years. "I understand," she said simply. Blake gently placed a hand on her shoulder and guided her back toward the elevator. As the doors closed, Mason returned to his table, straightening his tie with a satisfied expression. "The standards in this city are slipping everywhere," he remarked to his companions. "Thank God the summit still maintains some sense of decorum." His associates chuckled appropriately, and the evening continued as if nothing had happened. The soft jazz from the piano in the corner resumed its prominence in the ambient soundtrack of wealth and privilege. Downstairs, the girl stood in the marble-floored lobby, her reflection fractured across the mirrored walls. She pulled out a simple flip phone, another anachronism in the world of the latest iPhones, and dialed a number. "Sarah, it's Lily," she said when someone answered. "I'm at the restaurant, but they wouldn't let me in." She paused, listening. "No, it's okay. I'm not upset. Can you come get me? I'm in the lobby." Another pause. "No, don't tell her yet. I don't want to ruin her evening." Lily Carter ended the call and sat on one of the sleek leather benches in the lobby. Unlike most 13-year-olds who might have been crushed by such public rejection, Lily's face showed a remarkable calm. She pulled a small notebook from her pocket and began writing, occasionally glancing up at the people entering and exiting the prestigious building, studying them with quiet intensity. 30 minutes later, a town car pulled up outside the building. From it emerged Sarah Parker, a woman in her early 60s with silver hair styled in a neat bob and wire-rimmed glasses perched on her nose. She wore a simple but elegant navy blue dress and carried a leather portfolio under one arm. Her expression shifted from concern to gentle affection when she spotted Lily. "There you are," Sarah said, approaching the girl. "I came as quickly as I could." Lily stood up, tucking her notebook away. "Thanks for coming, Sarah." Sarah studied the girl's face carefully. "Are you all right? What happened exactly?" "A man said I didn't belong there," Lily replied with a small shrug. "He told the maître d' to make me leave." Something flashed in Sarah's eyes, a protective anger quickly controlled. "Did he now?" She glanced at her watch. "Your grandmother is still in her meeting across town. It's running long." She paused, thinking. "Lily, do you want to go home or would you like to try again?" Lily considered the question, her eyes drifting up toward the ceiling, somewhere beyond which was the summit and the man who had judged her solely on her appearance. "I'd like to try again," she said finally, a subtle determination hardening her features. "But first, can we stop somewhere? I need to change my clothes." Sarah's lips curved into a small, knowing smile. "I think that's an excellent idea. And while we're at it, I have a few phone calls to make." As they walked out of the building together, neither of them noticed Mason Brooks's associate stepping out of the elevator and crossing the lobby, his curious gaze following them through the revolving door before he continued on his way, the encounter already forgotten. An hour later, Sarah's town car pulled up to a modest brownstone in Brooklyn Heights. The neighborhood was respectable, but far removed from the opulence of Upper Manhattan where most of the summit's clientele resided. Lily climbed the steps to the 3-story building, unlocking the front door with practiced ease. "Mom, I'm home," she called out as she entered. The interior of the brownstone was warm and lived in, comfortable furnishings mixed with bookshelves that reached the ceiling, filled with well-worn classics and modern novels alike. Though not lavish, the space radiated cultured simplicity. Jennifer Carter appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. At 38, she shared her daughter's delicate features and thoughtful eyes, though her hair was a shade darker and cut in a practical bob. "Lily, I thought you were meeting your grandmother for dinner," Jennifer said, her expression shifting to concern when she noticed Sarah standing behind her daughter. "Sarah, what's going on? Is Eleanor all right?" "Eleanor is fine," Sarah assured her. "She's still in her meeting with the investors. There was a small incident at the summit." Jennifer's shoulders tensed immediately. "What kind of incident?" Lily dropped her backpack on the sofa. "It wasn't a big deal, Mom. They just wouldn't let me in because of how I was dressed." "Wouldn't let you in?" Jennifer's voice rose slightly. "Did they know who you were?" "That's just it," Sarah interjected, her tone measured. Lily didn't get the chance to explain. A patron, quite an influential one apparently, insisted she be removed before she could even mention Eleanor's name. Jennifer closed her eyes briefly, her jaw tightening. When she opened them again, there was a flash of old pain there. This is exactly why I left that world behind. The judgment, the superficiality, the constant evaluation based on appearances and bank accounts. Mom, it's okay, Lily insisted. I'm not upset. Jennifer studied her daughter's face. You should be. You have every right to be. I'm going back, Lily said simply. Sarah's going to help me. Jennifer turned to Sarah with a questioning look. Sarah gave a small diplomatic nod. With your permission, of course, Sarah added. I think it might be educational for certain parties involved. Jennifer sighed, running a hand through her hair. Let me guess. Eleanor doesn't know about this yet. Not yet, Sarah confirmed. She was quite explicit about wanting to reconnect with Lily without any staff interference. I thought it best to handle this situation discreetly before informing her. The relationship between Jennifer and her mother, Eleanor Reynolds, had been strained for nearly a decade. Jennifer had walked away from the Reynolds family fortune and the expectations that came with it, choosing instead to make her own way as a literature professor at NYU. The rift had only begun to heal in recent months, following Jennifer's divorce, and Eleanor's persistent efforts to reconnect with her only grandchild. I need to change, Lily announced, heading for the stairs. I'll be quick. Once Lily was out of earshot, Jennifer turned to Sarah, her voice low. Who was it? Who had her removed? Mason Brooks, Sarah replied, her usual professional restraint slipping just enough to reveal her distaste. Jennifer's expression darkened. Of course it was. That man has always represented everything wrong with that world. Eleanor has never particularly cared for him either, Sarah admitted, though she tolerates him for business reasons. What exactly are you planning, Sarah? Jennifer asked, studying the older woman's face. Sarah had been Eleanor's executive assistant for over 20 years, and Jennifer knew her well enough to recognize when wheels were turning behind those shrewd eyes. Sarah adjusted her glasses. Nothing dramatic, just a small lesson in hasty judgments, perhaps. Eleanor has always believed that the best education comes from experiencing consequences. Jennifer couldn't help the small smile that tugged at her lips. You always were more than just an assistant to her, weren't you? More like her conscience sometimes. Someone has to be, Sarah replied with a modest shrug. Your mother is brilliant with business, but occasionally needs reminding about the human element. Upstairs, Lily stood before her closet, pushing hangers aside until she found what she was looking for. A simple but elegantly cut navy blue dress that Eleanor had given her for her birthday 2 months ago. She had never worn it, feeling it was too formal for her everyday life. She laid it on the bed and then opened her small jewelry box, removing a delicate silver pendant with the Reynolds family crest, a stylized R surrounded by 3 stars. The pendant had been Eleanor's gift when they first reconnected 6 months ago. As she changed, Lily's mind drifted back to the man who had her removed from the summit. She hadn't recognized him personally, but she had seen his face before in the photos on her grandmother's office wall, group pictures from charity galas and business functions. Mason Brooks. Her grandmother never spoke much about him, but Lily had overheard enough conversations between Eleanor and Sarah to know he was considered a necessary alliance rather than a friend. Lily wasn't typically vindictive, but there was something about the casual cruelty of his dismissal that had struck a nerve. It wasn't just that he'd embarrassed her, it was the realization that he probably treated many people that way. People who didn't have the advantage of a powerful grandmother to set things right. When she descended the stairs 15 minutes later, both Sarah and Jennifer looked up in surprise. The transformation wasn't just in the clothing, though the dress fit perfectly and elevated her appearance considerably, but in Lily's bearing. She stood straighter, her chin lifted slightly, her expression composed in a way that suddenly made her resemblance to Eleanor unmistakable. You look lovely," Jennifer said softly, a complex emotion crossing her face. "Thanks, Mum," Lily replied. She hesitated, then asked, "Are you coming with us?" Jennifer shook her head. "Not this time. This is between you and your grandmother's world. Just—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Remember who you are beneath the dress and the name. That's what matters most." Lily nodded, understanding the deeper message in her mother's words. Jennifer had spent years teaching her that character outweighed status, that kindness trumped power, that the content of one's heart mattered more than the contents of one's wallet. These were the values that had driven Jennifer away from her privileged upbringing, and the reason she had kept Lily at arm's length from the Reynolds empire for so long. "I'll remember," Lily promised. Sarah checked her watch. "Eleanor should be finished with her meeting by now. She's probably wondering where you are." Before they left, Jennifer pulled Sarah aside. "Don't let Eleanor turn this into a public spectacle. That won't teach anyone anything worthwhile." "I agree completely," Sarah assured her. Discretion can be far more powerful than drama. As they drove back toward Manhattan, Lily watched the city lights bloom against the darkening sky. The contrast between her two worlds had never felt more pronounced. Her mother's thoughtful simplicity on one side, her grandmother's powerful empire on the other. For most of her life, Lily had only known her mother's world, with Eleanor Reynolds existing as little more than a name and a distant figure, glimpsed occasionally in business magazines. That had changed 6 months ago when Eleanor had finally broken the decade-long silence, reaching out to Jennifer with a request to meet her granddaughter. The initial reunion had been awkward, filled with the weight of unspoken history and Jennifer's obvious reservations. But over time, Lily had found herself drawn to her grandmother's sharp intelligence and surprisingly dry humor. Beneath Eleanor's formidable exterior was a woman who had built an empire from nothing, who had navigated a male-dominated business world through sheer force of will and strategic brilliance. "Sarah," Lily said as they crossed the Brooklyn Bridge, "tell me about the summit. Grandmother never talks much about the restaurants themselves." Sarah glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "The summit was your grandmother's first high-end establishment. She opened it 27 years ago, when everyone said a woman couldn't succeed in fine dining in Manhattan. It was her proving ground in many ways. The Reynolds Dining Group now owns 15 restaurants across the country, but the summit remains the flagship. And this man, Mason Brooks, he's important?" Sarah's lips pressed into a thin line. "He thinks he is. He's certainly wealthy and influential in real estate circles. Your grandmother maintains a professional relationship with him because he controls several properties that are of interest to the Reynolds Group." Lily considered this information carefully. "So, grandmother wouldn't want to alienate him." "Your grandmother," Sarah replied with a hint of a smile, "believes in teaching people lessons they remember, not in burning bridges unnecessarily. There's a difference." As they pulled up to the gleaming tower that housed the summit, Lily felt a flutter of nervousness in her stomach. This wasn't just about reclaiming her dignity anymore. It was about stepping into a part of her heritage she was only beginning to understand. Sarah handed her a small leather card holder. "Your grandmother had this made for you last week. She was planning to give it to you tonight." Lily opened it to find an identification card with the Reynolds Dining Group logo, her photo, and her name, Lily Carter Reynolds. The card identified her as a family member of the board. "Grandmother added her name to mine?" Lily asked, surprised. "She thought you might want the option sometimes," Sarah explained. "Your mother knows." They discussed it. This small revelation was significant. It represented a compromise between her two worlds, an acknowledgement from Eleanor that Jennifer's choices were valid, while still offering Lily a connection to the Reynolds legacy. As they entered the building's elegant lobby, Sarah placed a hand on Lily's shoulder. "Remember, the real power isn't in making someone feel small. It's in choosing how you use your advantages." Lily nodded, squaring her shoulders as they stepped into the elevator that would take them back to the summit, this time on very different terms. The elevator ascended smoothly, numbers illuminating in sequence, as Lily's stomach tightened with each passing floor. Her reflection in the polished brass doors showed a different girl than the one who had been dismissed hours earlier. The navy dress brought out the blue in her eyes, and the Reynolds pendant gleamed at her throat, a subtle but unmistakable symbol of her lineage. "Remember," Sarah said quietly as the elevator approached the 65th floor, "you have nothing to prove to anyone. This isn't about revenge." Lily nodded, though a small part of her couldn't help but anticipate the expression on Mason Brooks's face when he realized his mistake. She took a deep breath as the elevator slowed to a stop and the doors slid open. The summit was even more impressive in the evening hours. The city sparkled beyond the windows like a galaxy of earthbound stars, while inside, the lighting had been dimmed to create an atmosphere of intimate luxury. A pianist now played softly in the corner, the music floating above the murmur of conversation and the subtle clink of fine china and crystal. Blake Harrison's eyes widened slightly as he recognized Lily, his professional composure momentarily slipping before he recovered. "Good evening," he said, his gaze moving between Lily and Sarah with visible uncertainty. "Good evening," Sarah replied, her tone pleasant but carrying an undercurrent of authority. "Is David Mitchell available? We need to speak with him right away." Blake hesitated, clearly connecting the dots and realizing something significant was unfolding. "Of course. Please wait here a moment." As Blake disappeared into the restaurant, Lily scanned the dining room. The crowd had thinned somewhat since her earlier visit, but many tables were still occupied, including, she noted with a flutter of anticipation, Mason Brooks's corner table. He was still deep in conversation with his associates, gesturing emphatically as he made some point, entirely unaware of her return. David Mitchell emerged from the back of the restaurant, a tall man in his 50s with salt and pepper hair and the practiced smile of someone who had spent decades in hospitality management. The smile faltered slightly when he saw Lily, a flicker of recognition crossing his face even before he reached them. "Ms. Parker," he greeted Sarah, extending his hand. "It's always a pleasure to see you. And this must be—" He trailed off, looking at Lily with dawning comprehension. "This is Lily Carter Reynolds," Sarah confirmed, emphasizing the hyphenated surname. "Eleanor Reynolds' granddaughter." The color drained slightly from David's face. "Miss Carter Reynolds, it's an honor to meet you. I wasn't aware that Mrs. Reynolds had plans to introduce you to the summit this evening." "That was the plan," Sarah said smoothly. "Unfortunately, there was a misunderstanding earlier. Lily arrived before her grandmother and was asked to leave by one of your patrons." David's expression shifted to one of genuine distress. "I've just been informed about the incident. Please accept my most sincere apologies." "Had anyone realized—" "That's just it, Mr. Mitchell," Lily interjected, finding her voice stronger than she expected. "No one should have to be a Reynolds to be treated with basic dignity." David looked at her with newfound respect, recognizing Eleanor's directness in her granddaughter. "You're absolutely right, Miss Carter Reynolds. The behavior was unacceptable regardless of who you are." Sarah opened her leather portfolio. "We'd like to handle this discreetly. Mrs. Reynolds would prefer to avoid any public embarrassment for anyone involved." "Of course," David agreed quickly. "How would you like to proceed?" Sarah extracted an envelope from her portfolio. "First, this should be delivered to Mr. Brooks immediately." David accepted the envelope with a questioning look. "It's a receipt," Sarah explained. "Mrs. Reynolds has arranged to cover Mr. Brooks's dinner expenses this evening from her personal account." Lily watched David's eyebrows rise as he understood the subtle power move embedded in the gesture. It wasn't just about paying a bill, it was about establishing who truly held influence in this space. "I'll deliver this personally," David assured them. "And we'd like a table," Lily added, surprising both adults with her confidence. "Grandmother should be arriving within the hour and I'd like to be seated when she arrives." David smiled, genuine warmth replacing his earlier discomfort. "Of course, we have Mrs. Reynolds' regular table available. Please follow me." As they moved through the restaurant, Lily felt the weight of curious glances. She walked with her chin up, Sarah's reassuring presence at her side, lending her strength. Their path deliberately took them past Mason Brooks's table, though neither Lily nor Sarah acknowledged him directly. Once they were seated at a prime table near the windows, David discreetly signaled to a waiter, who promptly arrived with water and menus. "Mrs. Reynolds' usual aperitif will be brought when she arrives," David said. "In the meantime, please order whatever you'd like. Everything is, of course, complimentary this evening." After David departed, Lily allowed herself a small smile. "He's nervous." "As he should be," Sarah replied, a hint of satisfaction in her voice. "Your grandmother doesn't tolerate lapses in judgment, especially when they affect family." They ordered appetizers, and Lily was just sampling a delicate truffle arancini when she noticed a commotion across the restaurant. David Mitchell had approached Mason Brooks's table and was presenting the envelope with a deferential bow. Mason's expression shifted from confusion to disbelief as he opened it and read the contents. His head snapped up, eyes scanning the restaurant until they landed on Lily and Sarah. Recognition dawned on his face, followed by a flash of discomfort that he quickly masked behind a forced smile. He said something to David, who responded with a gesture toward their table. "He's coming over," Lily whispered, her heart suddenly racing. "Remember who you are," Sarah said quietly, "both as a Reynolds and as Jennifer Carter's daughter." Mason Brooks approached their table with the smooth confidence of a man accustomed to navigating uncomfortable situations. Up close, his tailored appearance was even more impressive. From his designer watch to his perfectly knotted tie, only the slight tightness around his eyes betrayed any tension. "Ms. Parker," he greeted Sarah with practiced charm. "What an unexpected surprise. I didn't realize you were dining here this evening." His gaze shifted to Lily, recognition now fully evident. "And this must be Lily Carter Reynolds," Sarah supplied when he trailed off. "Eleanor Reynolds' granddaughter." Mason maintained his smile, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Miss Carter Reynolds, I believe we had a misunderstanding earlier." He gestured to the envelope in his hand. "This is completely unnecessary. I can't accept." "It's not an offer, Mr. Brooks," Lily said, surprising herself with her composure. "It's already done." Mason's smile faltered for just a moment before he recovered. "I see. Well, had I known who you were, would it have mattered?" Lily asked, her voice steady despite the nervous flutter in her stomach. "Should it matter?" The directness of the question caught Mason off guard. He glanced at Sarah, perhaps hoping for a diplomatic rescue, but found only polite attention. "Of course it—" He stopped himself, regrouping. "What I mean is, the summit has certain standards that we all appreciate. It's what makes this establishment special." "Standards?" Lily repeated thoughtfully. "My grandmother started this restaurant when most people said she would fail. She built it on the idea that exceptional food and service should be the standards, not judgments based on appearances." Mason's expression tightened fractionally. "Your grandmother is a remarkable woman. I've always had the greatest respect for her achievements." "I'm still learning about them myself," Lily admitted. "We've only recently connected. But one thing I've already learned is that she values substance over style." A flash of genuine surprise crossed Mason's face at this personal revelation. The idea that Eleanor Reynolds' own granddaughter had been estranged from her was clearly news to him, and possibly valuable information in the business circles he traveled in. "I wasn't aware," he said, his tone softening slightly. "Family relationships can be complicated." "They can," Lily agreed, "but they're also revealing. How we treat people when we think they don't matter says a lot about who we really are." The pointed comment landed precisely as intended. Mason's composed facade cracked just enough to reveal a flicker of genuine discomfort. Before he could respond, the restaurant's atmosphere subtly shifted, conversations quieting as attention gravitated toward the entrance. Eleanor Reynolds had arrived. At 68, Eleanor moved with the confidence of someone who had spent decades commanding rooms. Her silver hair was styled in an elegant bob, her tailored charcoal suit impeccably cut. She paused briefly at the entrance, surveying the space with a practiced eye before her gaze settled on Lily's table. Even from a distance, the family resemblance was striking. The same determined set of the jaw, the same clear, assessing eyes. Mason Brooks straightened imperceptibly as Eleanor approached, his business smile firmly in place. "Eleanor, wonderful to see you. I was just having a delightful conversation with your granddaughter." Eleanor's piercing blue eyes, so similar to Lily's, assessed the situation in an instant. "Mason," she acknowledged with a polite nod before turning her full attention to Lily. Her expression softened visibly. "Lily, darling, I'm so sorry I'm late. The investors' meeting ran longer than expected." Lily stood to greet her grandmother, accepting a brief but warm embrace. "It's okay. Sarah helped me get settled." Eleanor turned to her assistant with a meaningful look. "I'm sure she did." The subtle emphasis suggested she had already been briefed on at least part of the evening's events. Mason cleared his throat. "Eleanor, there seems to have been a misunderstanding earlier. Your granddaughter and I—" "Yes, I've been informed," Eleanor interrupted smoothly. "We can discuss it another time. For now, I'd like to enjoy dinner with my granddaughter." The dismissal was polite but unmistakable. Mason nodded, recognizing when a strategic retreat was necessary. "Of course. Enjoy your evening, ladies. And Lily," he added with what seemed like genuine contrition, "I hope you'll accept my apologies for earlier." After Mason returned to his table, Eleanor took her seat, her assessing gaze moving between Lily and Sarah. "I understand there was an incident," she said quietly. "It's been handled," Sarah assured her. Eleanor nodded, then turned to Lily. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," Lily replied honestly. "It was educational." A small smile touched Eleanor's lips. "I imagine it was. For everyone involved." She glanced across the restaurant toward Mason's table. "Some lessons are overdue." As they ordered dinner, Lily noticed that the restaurant staff were now treating her with almost excessive deference. Word had clearly spread about her identity, and the same people who had witnessed her dismissal hours earlier were now bending over backwards to ensure her comfort. The irony wasn't lost on her. "You're quiet," Eleanor observed as their entrees arrived. "Are you sure you're not upset about what happened?" Lily considered the question carefully. "I'm not upset about being mistaken for someone unimportant," she finally said. "I'm bothered by the idea that being unimportant would make it okay to treat someone that way." Eleanor studied her granddaughter with newfound respect. "You sound like your mother." "Is that a compliment?" Lily asked, genuinely curious about where her grandmother stood on the philosophical differences that had separated her from Jennifer for so long. "It is," Eleanor said, surprising Lily with her frankness. "Your mother and I disagree on many things, but never on the importance of basic human dignity. My disappointment was that she thought she had to reject everything about our world to maintain her principles." Across the restaurant, Mason Brooks was settling his bill, the portion not covered by Eleanor's gesture, and preparing to leave with his associates. As he stood, his gaze drifted toward their table once more, his expression unreadable from a distance. Eleanor followed Lily's gaze. "Mason Brooks is a useful business contact, but he's never understood the difference between power and worth," she said quietly. "That's a distinction your mother always understood perfectly." For the first time, Lily glimpsed the possibility that the rift between her mother and grandmother might not be as simple as Jennifer had portrayed it, not just a rejection of wealth and privilege, but a more complex divergence of approaches to similar values. As the evening progressed, Lily found herself seeing the summit through new eyes, not just as a symbol of exclusivity and wealth, but as her grandmother's first major achievement, the foundation of an empire built by a woman who had defied expectations. The morning after the incident at the summit, Lily woke to the sound of gentle rain against her bedroom window. For a moment she lay still, processing the events of the previous evening. Dinner with her grandmother had extended late into the night, their conversation flowing more easily than ever before. Eleanor had shared stories of her early days building the business, the setbacks, the doubts, the triumphs, painting a picture of a woman far more complex than the imperious business titan Jennifer had described over the years. When Lily finally made her way downstairs, she found her mother at the kitchen table, grading papers with a cup of coffee at her elbow. Jennifer looked up, her expression expectant. "So, how did it go after I left?" Lily poured herself a glass of orange juice and sat across from her mother. "Better than I expected. Grandmother was different, more open." Jennifer set down her pen. "Different how?" She talked about the early days of the summit, about how hard it was to be taken seriously. Lily hesitated, then added, "She said I reminded her of you." Jennifer's eyebrows rose slightly. "Did she make that sound like a good thing?" "She did, actually." Lily studied her mother's face. "Mom, why did you never tell me how similar you and grandmother are in some ways?" Jennifer leaned back in her chair, surprise evident in her expression. "Similar? Your grandmother and I have fundamentally different views on almost everything that matters." "Do you?" Lily challenged gently. "You both care about being treated with respect. You both value independence. You both stood up for what you believed in, even when it was difficult." Jennifer opened her mouth to object, then closed it again, considering her daughter's words. "The methods are very different, Lily. The priorities. But maybe not the core values," Lily suggested. "Last night, when that man realized who I was, grandmother didn't make a scene. She didn't humiliate him publicly. She just established boundaries." Jennifer's expression softened. "That does sound like mother. Subtle, but devastating." The doorbell rang, interrupting their conversation. Jennifer went to answer it, returning moments later with a large envelope in her hands. "It's for you," she said, handing it to Lily. "Hand-delivered by a Reynolds Group courier." Lily opened the envelope to find a formal letter on Reynolds Dining Group stationery. It was an invitation to attend an emergency board meeting that afternoon as an observer. Attached was a temporary security badge for the Reynolds Tower and a handwritten note from Eleanor. "I think you'll find this educational. Car will pick you up at noon. E." Jennifer read the invitation over Lily's shoulder, her expression growing concerned. "What is she planning?" "I don't know," Lily admitted, "but I'd like to find out." Jennifer sighed. "Just be careful, Lily. Your grandmother operates in a world where appearances matter above all else. Don't get caught up in the glamour of it." "I won't," Lily promised, "but I think there's more to her world than that, and I want to understand it better." At precisely noon, a sleek black car arrived outside their brownstone. The driver, a young woman in a crisp uniform, opened the door for Lily with professional courtesy. "Miss Carter Reynolds, I'm to take you directly to Reynolds Tower. Mrs. Reynolds is already in the building and will meet you in the executive suite on the 60th floor." The drive to Manhattan gave Lily time to reflect on how quickly her life had changed in the past 6 months. From barely knowing her grandmother to now being invited to observe a board meeting, it was a transformation she couldn't have imagined. Part of her understood her mother's concerns. The world of wealth and corporate power had its own gravity, pulling people into patterns of behavior that could change them in subtle ways. But another part was genuinely curious about the empire her grandmother had built and what it might mean for her own future. Reynolds Tower dominated its corner of the Manhattan skyline, a gleaming structure of glass and steel rising 65 stories above the street. The summit occupied the top floor, but the 5 floors below it housed the corporate headquarters of the Reynolds Dining Group, with its portfolio of 15 high-end restaurants across major U.S. cities. In the lobby, Lily presented her temporary badge to security and was directed to a private elevator that would take her directly to the executive floor. As she ascended, she smoothed down her simple black dress, one of the few pieces in her wardrobe that felt appropriate for a corporate setting, and touched the Reynolds pendant at her throat for reassurance. The executive floor was a study in understated luxury. Muted colors, tasteful artwork, plush carpeting that muffled footsteps. Sarah was waiting when the elevator doors opened. "Good afternoon, Lily," she greeted with a warm smile. "The meeting is about to begin. Your grandmother thought you might appreciate some context before you join." She handed Lily a tablet. "This is the agenda and background materials for today's discussion." Lily scanned the documents as they walked down a corridor lined with photographs of Reynolds restaurants. The meeting agenda had a single item: review of customer experience standards and staff training protocols. Attached were several policy documents with sections highlighted for review. "This meeting was called because of what happened last night, wasn't it?" Lily asked. Sarah's expression remained professionally neutral. "Your grandmother believes in addressing issues promptly and thoroughly." They reached a set of double doors at the end of the corridor. Sarah paused before opening them. "Just observe today. Your grandmother values your perspective, but the board needs to handle this in their own way first." The boardroom was impressive, a long table of polished mahogany surrounded by leather chairs, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of the city. 8 people were already seated, with Eleanor at the head of the table. All conversation ceased when Lily entered. Eleanor rose to greet her. "Lily, thank you for joining us. Everyone, this is my granddaughter, Lily Carter Reynolds. She'll be observing our meeting today." Lily nodded politely as Eleanor introduced each board member. Most were older than her grandmother, men and women who had been part of the company's growth for decades. David Mitchell from the summit was also present, seated near the far end of the table. Eleanor guided Lily to a chair slightly removed from the main table. "You'll have a good view from here," she said quietly before returning to her position. "Thank you all for accommodating this emergency meeting," Eleanor began, her voice carrying the natural authority of someone accustomed to command. "As you've seen from the agenda, we're here to discuss our customer experience standards and staff training protocols. Last night, an incident occurred at the summit that highlighted some concerning gaps in our approach." She nodded to David, who cleared his throat nervously. "Last evening, a young guest was asked to leave the summit based solely on her appearance, and the assumption that she couldn't possibly belong in our establishment," David explained, carefully avoiding looking directly at Lily. "The request came from a regular patron with significant influence, and our staff complied without proper verification of the young person's identity or purpose for being there." Eleanor's expression remained impassive. "And this young person turned out to be your granddaughter, Mrs. Reynolds," David completed, discomfort evident in his voice. Though I should emphasize that even if she hadn't been, the treatment was inconsistent with the values we claim to uphold. Murmurs spread around the table as board members exchanged glances. Indeed, Eleanor agreed, and that's precisely why we're here today. Not because my granddaughter was treated poorly, though that certainly got my attention, but because this incident reveals a fundamental misalignment between our stated values and our actual practices. She pressed a button, and a screen descended from the ceiling at the end of the room. On it appeared the Reynolds Dining Group mission statement: to create exceptional dining experiences where every guest feels valued, respected, and welcomed. This has been our mission since I founded this company, Eleanor continued. Not to create exclusive enclaves for the wealthy, but to deliver exceptional experiences to all who choose to dine with us. Somewhere along the way, it seems we've allowed that mission to be corrupted by the very elitism we initially sought to transcend. One of the board members, an older man with silver hair, leaned forward. Eleanor, while I agree this incident was regrettable, we must be practical. Our establishments cater to a certain clientele. Standards must be maintained. What standards are those, Richard? Eleanor challenged. The standard that judges people based on the cost of their clothing? The standard that values a customer's bank account over their basic dignity? Those aren't the standards that built this company. Another board member, a woman in her 50s, interjected. The patron in question, Mason Brooks, represents significant business interests. His real estate group controls properties we're interested in for future expansion. I'm well aware of who Mason Brooks is, Victoria, Eleanor replied coolly. I'm also aware that he's always been more valuable to us than we are to him, a dynamic he exploits regularly. But this isn't about Mason Brooks. It's about who we are as a company. From her observation seat, Lily watched the dynamics of the room with fascination. Her grandmother commanded respect without raising her voice, steering the conversation with the skill of someone who had been navigating boardroom politics for decades. What exactly are you proposing, Eleanor? Asked Richard. Eleanor nodded to Sarah, who distributed folders to each board member. A comprehensive review and overhaul of our customer service training with emphasis on recognizing and eliminating bias, a clear procedure for verifying the identity and purpose of any guest before asking them to leave, and a company-wide recommitment to our founding principles. Victoria flipped through the materials. This will be expensive. Not as expensive as losing our way, Eleanor countered. Not as expensive as becoming just another playground for the privileged, where the only value that matters is financial. The discussion continued for nearly an hour, with various board members raising concerns about implementation, costs, and potential resistance from established clientele. Throughout it all, Eleanor remained firm but diplomatic, acknowledging concerns while steadily steering the conversation toward consensus. Finally, Richard sighed. You've made your point, Eleanor. I move we approve the proposed changes to training and protocols, with quarterly reviews to assess effectiveness. I second, said Victoria, surprising Lily with her about face. The vote was unanimous in favor. As the meeting concluded and board members began to disperse, David Mitchell approached Lily. Miss Carter Reynolds, I wanted to personally apologize again for last night's incident. It was completely unacceptable. Thank you, Lily replied sincerely. But I'm more interested in what happens next, in how things will change for guests who don't have my grandmother's name to protect them. David nodded solemnly. A fair point. I can assure you that I'm taking this very seriously. The summit was built on excellence, not exclusivity. We seem to have forgotten the difference. After the boardroom emptied, Eleanor joined Lily by the windows. What did you think? It was interesting, Lily admitted. Different than I expected. Less cutthroat, Eleanor suggested with a small smile. Contrary to what your mother might have told you, business doesn't have to be soulless to be successful. Lily turned to face her grandmother directly. Why did you want me here today? Really? Eleanor considered the question. Because you're old enough to start seeing the world as it really is, not just as others describe it to you. Your mother has her perspective on my world. It's not wrong, but it's incomplete. I wanted you to see another side of it. And what about Mason Brooks? What happens with him? A hint of steel entered Eleanor's expression. Mason will receive a personal letter from me this afternoon. He'll be informed that while he remains welcome at the summit, His behavior will be held to the same standard as any other guest. No special treatment, no exceptions. Will he still come? Probably, Eleanor acknowledged. Men like Mason don't easily surrender access to power, but he'll think twice before judging someone by their appearance in my establishment again. As they prepared to leave, Lily noticed a framed photograph on the wall she hadn't seen before. It showed a much younger Eleanor standing proudly in front of a newly opened restaurant. The sign behind her read The Summit, but it was clearly an earlier, more modest version than the current establishment. "Is that the original Summit?" Lily asked. Eleanor nodded, a wistful expression crossing her face. Before the tower, before the expansion, it was just one restaurant then, on the ground floor of an older building. We didn't have the view, but we had heart. Why did you move it? Growth demanded it, Eleanor said simply. But sometimes I wonder if we left something important behind in that first location, a certain authenticity. As they rode the elevator down to the lobby, Eleanor added, "Your mother visited me there once, you know, at the original Summit. She was about your age. She waited tables for a summer to learn the business from the ground up." This was news to Lily. "Mom never told me that." "There's a lot she never told you," Eleanor said, not unkindly, "just as there's a lot I never told her. That's the thing about family divisions. They create silences that can last generations if we let them." In the lobby, Eleanor's driver was waiting. "I've arranged for you to be taken home," she told Lily. "Unless you'd like to join me for a late lunch?" Lily hesitated. "I should get back. Mum will be wondering how it went." Eleanor nodded, understanding in her eyes. "Of course, but Lily, when you tell her about today, tell her everything. Even the parts that might challenge her view of me, of this world. Real understanding only comes from seeing the complete picture." As Lily settled into the car for the drive back to Brooklyn, she reflected on her grandmother's words. The complete picture was indeed more complex than she had imagined. Neither the purely mercenary world her mother had described, nor the simple meritocracy her grandmother sometimes portrayed. It was something more nuanced, a landscape of power and privilege where individual choices still mattered, where values could be preserved even amid luxury. 3 months after the incident at the Summit, Lily stood in the kitchen of her mother's brownstone, carefully arranging finger sandwiches on a serving platter. The living room had been transformed for the afternoon. Fresh flowers brightened every surface. Comfortable chairs had been arranged in conversational groupings, and a table by the window held an elegant tea service, a Reynolds family heirloom that Eleanor had recently gifted to Jennifer. "Do you think we have enough food?" Lily asked as Jennifer entered, carrying a cake stand laden with freshly baked scones. "More than enough," Jennifer assured her, surveying their preparations with a critical eye. "It's just tea, not a state dinner." But they both knew this wasn't just any tea. For the first time in nearly a decade, Eleanor Reynolds would be visiting Jennifer's home, a peace summit of sorts following weeks of cautious phone calls and tentative olive branches from both sides. The doorbell rang precisely at 3 o'clock. Lily opened it to find her grandmother standing on the stoop, elegant as always in a cashmere sweater and wool trousers, but notably less formal than her usual business attire. She carried a small gift bag and a bouquet of lilies. "Right on time," Lily said with a smile, accepting the flowers. "Mom's in the living room." Eleanor paused in the entryway, taking in the details of her daughter's home with curious eyes. "This is lovely, Lily. Very warm." In the living room, Jennifer stood as they entered. There was a moment of palpable tension as mother and daughter faced each other, years of distance and disagreement hanging in the air between them. "Hello, Mother," Jennifer said finally. "Thank you for coming." "Thank you for inviting me," Eleanor replied, her usual commanding presence softened by a hint of vulnerability. She extended the gift bag. "Just a small housewarming, though I realize you've been in this house for years." Jennifer accepted the bag with a small smile. Better late than never. As they settled into their tea, the initial awkwardness gradually gave way to careful conversation. They spoke of neutral topics at first: the unseasonably warm autumn, the recent renovation of the Brooklyn Public Library, Lily's progress in school. But eventually, as the teapot emptied and was refilled, the conversation turned to more meaningful matters. "I visited the Summit last week," Jennifer said, surprising both Lily and Eleanor. "I wanted to see the changes you'd implemented." Eleanor's eyebrows rose slightly. "And? What did you think?" "It was different," Jennifer acknowledged. The staff was remarkably attentive, not just to the obvious VIPs, but to everyone. I saw a young couple who were clearly there for a special occasion being treated with the same deference as the Wall Street types at the next table. That was the goal, Eleanor said simply. We've instituted comprehensive training across all 15 restaurants now. David Mitchell has been particularly passionate about the initiative. He mentioned that when he recognized me, Jennifer said. He also mentioned that Mason Brooks hasn't returned since you sent him that letter. Eleanor shrugged elegantly. His choice. The door remains open, provided he abides by our standards of conduct. Lily, who had been quietly observing the exchange between her mother and grandmother, finally spoke up. I think what happened that night changed more than just policies. It changed perspectives. Both women turned to her with questioning looks. What do you mean, dear? Eleanor asked. That night showed me that Mom's world and your world aren't as separate as I always thought, Lily explained. The values can be the same, even when the expressions are different. And it showed you both that I can navigate between those worlds without losing myself in either one. Jennifer and Eleanor exchanged a look that contained decades of complicated history. You're wise beyond your years, Jennifer said softly. She gets that from both of us, Eleanor added, a rare acknowledgement of their shared traits. The conversation shifted to the future, specifically Lily's growing involvement with the Reynolds Dining Group. Eleanor had created a special internship program that allowed Lily to learn different aspects of the business during school breaks, while Jennifer had insisted on a parallel commitment to community service, ensuring her daughter maintained perspective on privilege and responsibility. I've been thinking, Eleanor said, setting down her teacup, about the original summit location. The one on 42nd Street, Jennifer asked. I thought that building was demolished years ago. It was, Eleanor confirmed, but the space on the ground floor of our new development on 9th Avenue is still available. I've been considering opening something there, something different from our current establishments. Different how? Lily asked, intrigued. Eleanor's eyes lit up with the spark that had built her empire. A restaurant that bridges worlds, high-quality cuisine but at accessible price points, a place where excellence doesn't equate to exclusivity. Where a professor, she nodded toward Jennifer, could dine comfortably alongside a CEO. Jennifer looked genuinely surprised. That's not what I would have expected from you, Mother. People can evolve, Jennifer, Eleanor replied. Even stubborn old businesswomen like me. What would you call it? Lily asked. A smile touched Eleanor's lips. I was thinking common ground. The name hung in the air between them, its symbolic significance not lost on anyone in the room. I like it, Jennifer said finally. It's honest. Eleanor turned to Lily. I'd like you to be involved in the concept development. Your perspective, straddling both worlds as you do, would be valuable. I'd like that, Lily agreed, a feeling of rightness settling over her. As the afternoon light began to fade, Eleanor reluctantly prepared to leave. At the door, she hesitated, then turned to Jennifer. I've missed a great deal of your life, she said, uncharacteristic emotion making her voice slightly rough. And Lily's. I can't reclaim that time, but perhaps we can build something new going forward. Jennifer's expression softened. I think we already have. 1 week later, Lily found herself standing in an empty commercial space in Chelsea, watching as her grandmother pointed out features to the architect. The shell of what would become common ground was still raw, concrete floors, exposed pipes, blank walls waiting for vision to transform them. The kitchen will be open concept there, Eleanor was saying, gesturing toward the back wall. I want guests to see the craft that goes into their food. Transparency builds trust. Lily wandered toward the front of the space where floor-to-ceiling windows looked out onto the busy street. People of all descriptions passed by, business professionals in suits, students with backpacks, tourists consulting maps, workers in uniforms. A microcosm of the city itself. She was so absorbed in people watching that she didn't immediately notice the man who had stopped outside, studying the "Coming Soon Common Ground" sign that had been installed that morning. When she finally registered his presence, her stomach tightened with recognition. Mason Brooks. He hadn't seen her yet, his attention focused on the permit information displayed beside the door. Lily hesitated, unsure whether to retreat or stand her ground. Before she could decide, her grandmother appeared at her side. Well, Eleanor said quietly, this is unexpected. Mason looked up at the sound of her voice, surprise registering on his face when he saw both Reynolds' women watching him through the glass. After a brief hesitation, he inclined his head in acknowledgement. Eleanor moved to the door and opened it. "Mason, I didn't realize you were interested in our new venture." He straightened his tie, a nervous gesture that humanized him slightly in Lily's eyes. "I own the building across the street," he explained. "Natural interest in the neighborhood." "Of course," Eleanor replied neutrally. "Would you like to come in? We're just reviewing the preliminary designs." Mason's gaze shifted to Lily, a flicker of discomfort crossing his features. "I wouldn't want to intrude." "It's not an intrusion if you're invited," Lily said, surprising herself with the words. Something like relief softened Mason's expression. He stepped inside, maintaining a respectful distance as he surveyed the space. "It's different from your usual properties," he observed. "Intentionally so," Eleanor confirmed. "Common Ground will operate on a different model entirely." As Eleanor explained the concept, Lily observed Mason's reactions. The arrogance she remembered from their first encounter seemed muted now, replaced by a more thoughtful demeanor. When Eleanor mentioned the accessible pricing structure and community engagement plans, he nodded with what appeared to be genuine interest. "It's ambitious," he said when she finished, challenging the assumption that quality must come with exclusivity. "Some assumptions deserve to be challenged," Eleanor replied. "Wouldn't you agree?" Mason met her gaze directly. "I've been rethinking quite a few assumptions lately." His eyes shifted briefly to Lily. "Some lessons are particularly effective." The moment stretched between them, laden with unspoken understanding. Then Mason glanced at his watch. "I should be going. Thank you for the overview." He turned to Lily. "Miss Carter Reynolds, it was good to see you again. Under better circumstances." After he left, Eleanor watched through the window as he crossed the street. "Well," she said thoughtfully, "people can surprise you." "Do you think he's really changed?" Lily asked. "I think he's trying," Eleanor replied. "And that's a start." As the weeks passed, Common Ground began to take shape. Lily divided her time between school, her regular life in Brooklyn, and the developing restaurant. Her mother and grandmother, while still navigating the delicate process of reconciliation, found common purpose in supporting her increasing involvement in the family business. The grand opening was scheduled for a Friday evening in December. Snow had fallen earlier in the day, giving the city a pristine, expectant quality. Inside Common Ground, final preparations were underway. Tables being set, champagne being chilled, staff receiving last-minute instructions. The space had been transformed from the empty shell Lily had first seen into something both elegant and welcoming. Rich wood tables were paired with comfortable chairs upholstered in warm fabrics. The open kitchen gleamed with state-of-the-art equipment, where chefs in simple white uniforms were already preparing for the evening. The lighting was soft, but clear enough to read menus without squinting. Most striking was the absence of the hushed, reverent atmosphere that characterized the summit. Here, conversation and laughter were clearly encouraged. Lily stood near the host station, watching as her mother and grandmother conferred with the head chef. The sight of them working together still felt novel, but increasingly natural. Jennifer had surprised everyone by contributing her expertise in literature and history to the restaurant's concept, suggesting menu items inspired by classic New York authors and naming private dining rooms after literary landmarks. The first guests were scheduled to arrive in 30 minutes, a carefully curated mix of media, influencers, community leaders, and regular New Yorkers who had won reservations through a neighborhood lottery. Lily smoothed down her simple but elegant black dress, touching the Reynolds pendant that had become her talisman. "Nervous?" asked Sarah, appearing at her side. "A little," Lily admitted. "It feels like we're doing something important," Sarah smiled. "You are. Bridging worlds isn't easy, but it's necessary." The door opened, and David Mitchell entered, stamping snow from his shoes. "The car service is ready," he reported. "All the summit staff who volunteered to help tonight will be arriving momentarily." This had been one of Eleanor's innovations, encouraging staff from her established restaurants to participate in the opening, creating cross-pollination of culture and skills. Many had eagerly volunteered, including Blake Harrison, who had requested specifically to work with Lily on the host team. "Everything looks perfect," David said, surveying the space. "A far cry from that night at the summit, isn't it?" "That feels like a lifetime ago," Lily replied. "In some ways it was," David agreed. Your grandmother won't admit it, but that incident sparked something in her, a recommitment to her original vision that has affected every aspect of the company. As the final preparations continued, Lily stepped outside for a moment of quiet reflection. The street was busy with evening commuters and people beginning their weekend celebrations. Across the way, the lights in Mason Brooks's building twinkled against the darkening sky. The door opened behind her, and Jennifer joined her on the sidewalk. Cold out here, her mother observed, pulling her coat tighter. Just needed a minute, Lily explained. It's all a bit overwhelming. Jennifer studied her daughter's face. Second thoughts? No, Lily said quickly. Just taking it all in. 3 months ago, I didn't even know grandmother, not really. Now we're opening a restaurant together. Life changes quickly sometimes, Jennifer acknowledged, especially when strong-willed Reynolds women are involved. Lily smiled at that. You're a Reynolds too, Mom, even if you don't use the name. I suppose I am, Jennifer conceded. Some things you can't escape, no matter how far you run. She gazed through the windows at Eleanor, who was inspecting place settings with characteristic attention to detail. And sometimes you realize you don't want to run anymore. They stood in companionable silence for a moment, watching the city move around them. Mom, Lily said finally, do you ever regret the years you and grandmother spent apart? Jennifer considered the question carefully. I regret that it took something so dramatic to bring us back together. I regret that you missed knowing her sooner. She paused. But I don't regret the life we built, the values we established independent of her world. And now? Now we see if we can have both, Jennifer said simply. The independence and the connection, the values and the legacy. Inside, Eleanor was gesturing for them to return. It was almost time for the doors to open. As they turned to go back in, a familiar figure approached from across the street. Mason Brooks, accompanied by a woman Lily didn't recognize, stopped a respectful distance away. Professor Carter, he greeted Jennifer. Miss Carter Reynolds, I hope it's not presumptuous of me to stop by. We have dinner reservations for later this evening, but I wanted to offer my congratulations before the crowds arrive. Jennifer's expression was neutral, but not unwelcoming. Mr. Brooks, I don't believe we've been formally introduced, though I've heard quite a bit about you. No doubt, he acknowledged with a self-deprecating smile. Not all of it flattering, I imagine. He gestured to his companion. This is Catherine Chen, my fiancée, and more relevantly, the architect who designed the community center my foundation is building in Queens. The woman extended her hand. It's a pleasure to meet you both. Mason has told me about your new restaurant concept. It sounds wonderful. Lily shook Catherine's hand, noting the warmth in her eyes and the easy confidence in her manner. Something about her suggested she was not a person who would tolerate arrogance or cruelty, which made her relationship with Mason all the more intriguing. We should let you get back inside, Mason said. We'll return for our reservation at 8. As they walked away, Jennifer turned to Lily with raised eyebrows. His foundation. That's new, Lily acknowledged. Though grandmother mentioned he's been making changes in how he conducts business. Jennifer shook her head with a wry smile. The ripple effects of one night continue to spread. When they re-entered the restaurant, Eleanor was waiting near the door. Was that Mason Brooks I saw outside? He stopped by to offer congratulations, Lily explained. He's coming back later with his fiancée. They have reservations. Eleanor nodded thoughtfully. Good, it's fitting that he should be here tonight. Why? Jennifer asked. Because in a strange way we have him to thank for this, Eleanor replied, gesturing to the restaurant around them and, by extension, to their renewed family connection. Sometimes the most important lessons come from unexpected sources. As the first official guests began to arrive, Lily took her position at the host station, ready to welcome them to common ground. Looking around at what they had created, not just a restaurant but a symbol of reconciliation and new beginnings, she felt a sense of completion. The dignity of a person wasn't in their clothing or their bank account, but in how they treated others, especially those they perceived as having less power than themselves. That night at the summit had taught her that lesson in the most personal way possible. And now, months later, that lesson had transformed not just her understanding of her family legacy, but the legacy itself. Common Ground would stand as a testament to that transformation, a place where different worlds could meet on equal footing, where excellence and accessibility could coexist, where the true value of a person would never be judged by appearances. As she welcomed the first guests with a warm smile, Lily knew that her journey between worlds was just beginning, but for the first time, she felt fully equipped to navigate it with confidence and grace, carrying the best of both her mother's principles and her grandmother's vision forward into a future of her own making.